Hello and welcome to the NDTV Dialogues, a conversation of ideas. Tonight we look at the big game changer reform, the goods and services tax. How will it actually work? How will India change? How will our economy get a boost, and what will be the impact on India's growth rate? Who better to discuss it with than my current panel? With me is Amitabh Kant, CEO of Niti Aayog. Also with me, Praful Patel, former Heavy Industries and Aviation Minister, currently NCP MP. I'm also joined by Derek O'Brien, who heads the Rajya Sabha Parliamentary Party, the Trinamool. He was on the Select Committee as well for this bill. Mr. R. Chandrasekhar, head of NASSCOM, former Telecom Secretary. I'm also joined by Mr. Kishore Biani, CEO of Future Group, one of the biggest Indian retailers. Thank you all very much for coming in. Mr. Kant, this is a reform you were really keen on seeing. I've seen many interviews with you and you've talked about the point that this is something in national interest. Why do you think GST will be a game changer?
Well, you know, Sonia, it's really path-breaking in many ways. It's also demonstrated that our Parliament is really truly redefining the center-state fiscal relationship in many ways. But I think the big thrust which GST is going to give is in terms of simplification of tax. And the tax system needed a huge process of ease of doing business, which happens. But I think more than that, the manufacturing, the make in India, the tax system in many ways was unmaking India. And that will really give a huge thrust to manufacturing in India, value addition in India, and make India a great manufacturing nation in due course. But I think one of the key things is that it'll raise resources for states and center. It'll give a huge amount of responsibility to the states, because the way the GST Council is configured, states will have to play a huge role. The whole tax structure will now impinge on consensus between center and state. 1/3 with center, 2/3 with the states, 75% majority, and therefore you need to arrive at a consensus, and therefore every single state will have to play a very critical and very significant role. And this is truly redefining the fiscal relationship between center and state.
So really exemplifying the federal structure in a way. And Praful Patel, in your speech in Parliament, you made interesting points on that, because you talked not just about how states will be impacted by this, but you talked even about the city of Mumbai and the revenues that come in here. We look at GST as the big game changer. But do you feel that when we come down to actually look at the nitty-gritty, that's where some questions still need to be answered?
Such a important legislation, if there were fractious and too much of debate and dialogue which would have ended nowhere, I think it would have also led to problems in implementation. As Amitabh said, it's between the states and the center to both implement it. And the states have the primary responsibility, because the architecture, ultimately the first point of contact is going to be the state. And the state has to work very closely with the center and make sure that this is a success. And I also mentioned what you said. Within a state, there's another state, like say Mumbai Municipal Corporation. Its revenues only on octroi alone are 8,000 to 9,000 crores a year. And that is bigger than the budget of many states of this country. So I think even there, I think the fine-tuning, the detailing will have to be done, because the money, when the center is assuring, say Maharashtra or any other state, the minimum revenue it's earning, say in this year, it will be available to them. But within that, the revenues of, say, Mumbai Municipal Corporation have to be transferred to them on time. There are civic bodies. It's not only about Mumbai. It could be Bengaluru, it could be Chennai, it could be any other city. So I think this has to be also dealt with effectively. Therefore, I mean, I agree. We needed this great idea. At the end of the day, there were far too many taxes, multiplicity at every level. I mean, can you imagine octroi lines? I started my career, I said it in Parliament, as the President of Municipal Council of Gondia. So I remember that small town. Even outside there, you'd see octroi naka and the trucks and the pile-up, of goods outside the small town. So it's happening all across the country. And there is pilferage, of course. There is, problems. There are other things. So, it delays, and it's also cumbersome. So I think the simplification of and because of GST is going to be fantastic in the long run. But the challenges in the short term are huge. So for any government, whether it's a state or center, there's going to be a lot of flack in the initial time, because people are not used to a certain way of working. We have our own little shortcuts, and those shortcuts are going to be plugged. At the same time, the ease is going to be tremendous. So I think it's a very balanced tightrope walk which the government, both at state and center, will have to do it. But the good thing, as I said, is since all parties, all states are on board, therefore there is no reason for us to be, I mean, skeptical about whether, you know, GST is going to be good and a success or not.
No, in fact, that really, I think when you say historic, is not just the reform, but the fact that how it went through, actually. I think Prime Minister Modi made the point that who gave birth, who's actually going to nurture it, and it really doesn't matter now.
I wish everybody had seen reasons much earlier. But anyway,
when you were on the opposite side, when you were in the treasury benches.
But we've seen, you know, I've seen it from both sides. And well, anyway, at the end of the day, I think the country is the gainer and the winner. So I think let's look at it positively and let's forget the past. But we've seen it from both sides, and we know. I've seen it even in the select committee. I was there, and we could see how, you know, aggressively everybody used coming in, but at the end of the day, the same people saw reason.
You spoke in Parliament this week very eloquently on what you called the GST. You gave different definitions of Girgit Samjhauta tax. You made the point about Mr. Chidambaram and said the Congress did the go-slow tax. And you said that parties' positions depended on where they were sitting in respective governments. GST as a game changer. Do you think that's validated at the point? And you've raised certain points, and what about the states? What about central taxes which are never actually paid? They're owed, thousands of crores owed to the states. How will that actually play out?
You know, as a political party on the ground who've promised this GST 4 times in our manifesto, there's no use anybody now saying we are for the idea of GST. We are more concerned about the implementation of GST. And since I have had the privilege of being on the select committee, and my colleague is now the chairman of the empowered committee. So I have actually seen this. The Congress, the GST, the bill which they brought in 2011, you know, and how they had the idea in 2006.
Of course, Praful was in the cabinet at that time, so he can't escape responsibility.
I said it on the floor of Parliament that I was always for, and we were always for it.
But now he's wearing full white, so he's okay. So I think really what happened here is, for us in the select committee, you know, firstly, the BJP also have changed their position, so I only blame the Congress party. The BJP have said all things. The leader of the House in Rajya Sabha said he doesn't even need the Rajya Sabha now. Our friend Mr. Arun Jaitley. So that these two. But the parties in the middle, and we saw this in the select committee, this bill, if GST is implemented, you've got to thank that group in the middle. Anyone can take the credit, we don't mind. But there's a group in the middle who made it practical. Mr. Chidambaram was talking about his perfect bill. You can wait till Lululand and you won't get your perfect bill. Of course, this is not you can't have these perfections. I was wondering, you know, Sonia, we should have actually had a hidden camera in the select committee.
No work would have got done then.
No. If we had 11 or 12 meetings, and you should have seen the kind of stonewalling which the 3 representatives of the Congress were doing. No different from what the BJP were doing when they were in opposition. And you say parties like the Trinamool and the SP and the BSP and all these parties.
How obstructionist and
yeah, but we were so consistent, and now I really believe that I don't want to talk about the past, it's not worth it, and we're not here to do any politics because there are no politicians here in that sense, or from the Congress and BJP, so I'm so comfortable. But on a serious note, now we have to look ahead. Yeah. And what's the way ahead? The way ahead is that on the front foot, the chief ministers like Mamta Di, Nitish, Kejriwal, everyone, they're saying, I want to bring you those 16 states, bring the bill in November to Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. Now, in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, already there shouldn't be any change of tactics, because it needs to pass quickly in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. Because again, a money bill, finance bill, all bakwas. Now we need to pass it, and I'm sure all the brilliant bureaucrats across the country will make this happen.
Did you think GST would actually go through the session? Were you optimistic?
Well, I was extremely confident that it will go through and people will see reason, because it's in our national interest. And you know, I'm really glad that everybody came around, voted in favor, states are in favor. You know, what it really shows is that the economic agenda has, the politicians are driving that economic agenda.
And it can be separated from political agenda.
Absolutely. So it's a great victory for democracy. You know, just to this point which was just spoken about, actually, there's a recent study which has just shown that India loses about close to 80,000 crores in check posts there are we have 14 checkposts around states, and there are, lorries which wait for about almost 14 to 15 hours in eastern part of India simply because of that. All this will vanish.
I'm going to bring in Mr. Biani on that, because I think he's really been talking about this from when this bill first came out, that how much the country really needed this. Mr. Biani, when you're hearing about here both Mr. Kant and Mr. Praful Patel talking from another perspective about what people go through when they have to pay those different taxes, when their trucks have to wait, when goods have to be moved, as somebody who's actually experienced this, what do you say from your perspective today about the GST, why it was so important for it to be passed, and what you hope to see now?
I think retail is the last leg of any economic activity, and so all the taxes which comes into play throughout the economic activity, one can get a set off on that. So in that sense, it's a very good welcome step for a retailer. Secondly, the informal trade which exists in the country significantly becomes a formal trade. So everybody now works on a invoice and a bill because they have to take claims. So that is the second big thing which will change. Third is the efficiencies which the business brings in. Our goods, we transport crores and crores worth of goods every day. There are 10,000 lorries moving from here to there. I think the speed at which we need to operate in a new economy is very different from the speed which we used to operate earlier. Every day it costs us money. And I think it will be the free flow of movement of goods across states will help us to reduce number of warehouses, will increase our efficiency in making the goods reach much faster to the stores, much faster to the consumers. So overall simplification, the number of forms which we used to fill, I think the simplification alone is going to bring up efficiencies for us. Right. So overall, I think it's very, very positive in every which way.
And Mr. Chandrasekhar, as representative now of so many of the industry of the new economy, in a sense, what is the impact you're going to see there? Of course, one aspect has been that whether state governments and whether the central government will be IT compliant to get all this, the GST machinery actually on the ground. And for you all as well, because we've seen interesting statements from startups who are talking about regulatory cholesterol, talking about ease of doing business, but there's still some concern about what this means for the new economy.
Well, I think, we have supported the passage of the GST, and obviously it's something which is very good for all the reasons that have been mentioned. But I must also say that from the perspective of the services industry in general and the IT services in particular, where what we deal with is something which is intangible, a lot of the conceptual framework in the GST, in the law, not in the Constitution Amendment Bill, in the law, is centered around the thought of something which is physical. And when you start applying that to the intangible goods, then there are certain issues. So in our view, a lot will depend on how that law is drafted and how effectively it is implemented. And if that is not done carefully, keeping in mind the variation between services and especially the virtual services that I'm talking about, then it could actually have an adverse impact on the ease of doing business. It could result in a lot of taxes getting collected and having to be refunded and clogging up the system. It could lead to a lot of litigation in terms of how you value it and where it is actually being provided. All of these could be there. Because
it's a completely new area, and in that...
It's a completely new area, exactly. So therefore, I think these aspects need to be addressed. This is something that we have brought out. And unless these are done carefully, then you might have a situation where companies today, if you have today, for example, a simple transaction between an IT services company and a bank, where the IT services company is providing a set of IT services to the bank, which is providing services across the length and breadth of the country, post GST, the IT service provider will actually have to disaggregate the entire service, how it has been provided, from which location it has been done, and ascribe a value to that, and pay tax on each of them, and then have some of that being questioned as to whether this valuation is right or not, even though it's an purely internal process of the company, an accounting which is not being done today. Likewise, for the user or the buyer of that service, then having to disaggregate it and then ascribe a value to how much of that nationwide contract is being consumed at different locations. All of this, if it is not done with a sufficient amount of flexibility and understanding of the nature of this business could lead to a bit of a
I want to get Mr. Kant in on that, because ease of doing business, Make in India has been your mantras as such. But these worries, because after all, I think even it was interesting to see people like Amitabh Bachchan, etc., tweet that wonderful GST is through, but what does it mean? We don't understand it. For an average Indian, what does it actually mean? Will it be easier, or will it be another nightmare of implementation?
Sonia, the challenge has just begun, and execution is going to be the key. The important thing is that India has been plagued with very complex, very complicated, and probably the most difficult tax laws in the world.
Only bureaucrats can understand.
No,
I have two bureaucrats here on my panel.
Only tax officials understand.
Yes.
But, the opportunity here is to make the GST very simple. The tax law must be very simple. There should be very few exemptions to the law. Keep the tax rate very moderate, and so as to ensure that GST is not anti-inflationary. And then you will see the huge spurt in economic activity within India. You will see a huge spurt in, in manufacturing. I think one of the key reasons is why India is not a great manufacturing nation but a great service nation is because we provide a huge lot of exemptions to imports in India at the cost of domestic manufacturing. And therefore, once you've done away with central sales tax, etc., and had moderate level of taxation, and you will see such a big spurt to manufacturing that India will emerge as the big winner. And now the challenge really is that how do you take the states along, because they are a very critical player in this.
No, and the IT, the point he was making, but how do you decide whether you're disaggregating one service, which was, etc. I mean, that's also going to be a challenge as well.
But Sonia, in this country, there have been some exemptions. Somebody has been a winner. Somebody has been taxed. It's been a flawed tax regime. Now, you've got an opportunity to begin all anew and ensure that everybody is at the same level playing field and create a world-class tax system. Now, you have to take all the states along. So the challenge, the execution is really the key. And I think Mr. Jaitley has great diplomatic skills to win over the states.
Mr. Patel, one aspect which kept coming up in Parliament was the worry about what the rate would actually be. The Congress now says that 18% should be the maximum and it should be a finance, not a money bill. You've said that as well. Will it actually make the prices go up? The worry about whether it will be inflationary or not?
Well, one thing has to be understood very clearly, that with 57% of our GDP forming by way of services, we will have some impact of even R&R which is moderate, as Amitabh said. Even if it is say 18%, it's still more than what you're paying today. But it won't be 18%. It has to be around anything between 20-22, because otherwise the government will not be able to meet the deficit of some of the states. So I think even if it's 20-22, whatever that band, it is still going to be initially inflationary. It's going to cause some problems because the consumer is going to feel that he's paying much more. The other side is the manufacturing, of course, what he said is certainly the biggest beneficiary. But manufacturing constitutes much smaller percentage of our GDP, so initially that is going to be a big challenge. The third challenge, which Mr. Chandrasekhar said, though the IT platform, the architecture is being prepared and there's going to be a lot of work to do after the bill is passed. But the fact is that even our way of doing business, you see, the phone, the tablet has changed life for us. We really don't know how, at which point the goods and services are actually going to be passed on to you. So it's also going to redefine a lot of things. I don't think anybody can hazard a complete guess as to what will be eventually the architecture and how it will be, defining or redefining the way we do business. So there is a lot of gray area. I think I agree with him to the point that we have to have one uniform tax structure in the country. But the transition, and in India, we are a chaotic country in many ways. So we are not going to be having, though we have agreed on everything, but there are forces internal and external. So we're going to have a challenge to face that. But certainly, no matter what we say, the revenue neutral rate at 18% is going to be most impossible for the government to factor in all the shortfall. And anything above 20 is also going to have a lot of pressure, both on the government and on the consumer, basically. I mean, he's going to pay from his pocket, and which is not used to paying that higher tax rate. So we're going to have initial, a lot of, I would say, ifs and buts. let's not be, you know, disillusioned by that, but at the same time, let's also not go with our eyes closed. Yeah, because we ought to know that there are going to be some disruptions, and especially the IT. I'm telling you, the e-commerce, the way we do business is completely an area I don't think that animal has yet been understood or tamed.